Morning.
Morning.
Today's story comes to us from Luke chapter 15. And takes place as Jesus is still on the road to Jerusalem. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus on his way. And as Jesus' following grows ever larger as he's on his way to Jerusalem, the Pharisees become ever more nervous. And as they're traveling, they come across different people in different places. And one time, all of the tax collectors and sinners were gathering around Jesus to listen to him. And the Pharisees and the legal experts were grumbling to each other, saying, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." And so Jesus turned to them and told them this parable. He said, "There was a certain man who had 2 sons. And the younger son said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the inheritance.' Then the father divided his estate between them, and soon after the younger son gathered everything together and took a trip to a land far away. And there he wasted his wealth through extravagant living. And when he had used up his resources, a severe food shortage arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, and he who sent him into the field to feed his pigs. And this younger son, he longed to eat his fill from what the pigs ate, but no one would give him anything. And so when he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have more than enough food, but I am starving to death? I will get up and go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. So take me on as one of your hired hands.' So he got up and went to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was moved with compassion. His father ran to him, hugged him, and kissed him. And the son said, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Fetch the fattened calf and slaughter it. We must celebrate with feasting, because this son of mine was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field. Coming in from the field, he approached the house and heard music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked what was going on. And the servant replied, "Your brother has arrived, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because he received his son back safe and sound." Then the older brother was furious and didn't want to enter in, but his father came out and begged him. He answered his father, "Look, I've served you all these years, and I never disobeyed your instruction. Yet you've never given me as much as a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours returned after gobbling up your estate on prostitutes, you slaughtered the fattened calf for him." And then his father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." So now I invite you to wander along with me about today's story. In Jewish law, inheritance was typically divided upon the father's death. So I wonder why the younger son asks for his inheritance early. He wanted to party.
Maybe he saw the older son in the father's good graces and doing everything that he was supposed to do, and as a typical younger son, wanted to go off and do something on his own. Maybe he didn't see himself there.
So he perhaps didn't see himself fulfilling the role that he saw his brother fulfilling.
Yeah.
And he wanted to be independent, do his own thing, something different.
Yeah.
Some youth take more risks than others. Particularly in those adolescent years.
Right.
Sure.
I'm kind of with Theron, thinking that he was more,
A bon vivant?
yeah, right. He was the good time kid.
Sure.
Just wanted to go off and party and you know, enjoy. And,
Yeah, so-
and he saw his brother being responsible. He said, okay, well, dad's okay because brother is there. So, and I assume it's the older brother is the one that stays. It's the younger one that's yeah, right.
Yeah.
So that in itself suggests.
Yeah. So some are more naturally inclined to take more risks than others. And perhaps, if the older brother hadn't been so responsible, maybe
Right.
he would have hesitated more,
Yeah.
perhaps. But he saw that the needs were taken care of, so he was like, all right, well, this is going to be mine, so I want to take it now and go do what I want to do. Okay?
He was tired of working in the field.
Tired of working in the field? Yeah. By the time he is feeding pigs, a ritually unclean animal, he has reached the lowest status possible for a Jewish man. I wonder why the younger son decides to return to his father and what he expects will happen.
Well, he returns because he's starving.
Okay, so he's starving, he lacks food at a very simple, basic necessity level.
And he expects he won't be well received. And so he practices in his mind what he's going to say.
Yeah, so we hear in the parable how he is rehearsing what he's going to say. and to try to, he doesn't expect much from his father, but he at least is trying to make it as good as possible for him upon his return. Yeah.
I think he's genuinely trying to make amends. I mean, it says, I think he comes to his senses, right?
Yeah.
Something
So
like
yeah, perhaps he was trying to make amends.
And so he sees that he's
Yeah,
been
when he came to his senses, he
dissolute.
said,
And he actually does see, oh, I've just squandered my inheritance and now I'm really in trouble.
sure. Yeah, so there's that open question, did he, authentically repent? It says he came to his senses, not quite, so directive as saying he wanted to amend his life, but he realized things weren't working out for him. It could mean he decided to repent.
This version of the story says that he thought about his father's hired hands and that they were well fed, and so I think that because he didn't have food, that's what drove him to go back. Even if he was a hired hand to his father, he would be well fed. I mean, that was at least this telling of the story that really resonated.
Right, he seems to have, at the very least, recognized that his father's hired hands were better off than he, and thinks that he has a solid shot at
Being a
becoming a
hired
hired hand. Maybe not getting his former status, but at least being a hired hand. Yeah. So, I wonder about the two very different responses of the elder son and the father. I wonder why it feels so good to act like the older brother.
Feels so good.
So good to act like the older brother. Or perhaps it doesn't.
Everybody likes to feel self-righteous,
Right. There's that.
self-important.
Yeah.
And why didn't the father ever slay a goat for the older son who was such a good son, and he never did any expression of appreciation like what he does for this kid?
Sure. Yeah. So that by normal standards, the elder son would be like, "This is unfair."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Why haven't you ever done anything like this for me? And I've been a much better son.
Yeah.
It's easy for me to identify with the older son, I have to say.
Sure. Yeah. It's easy to identify with.
I was a very good girl.
Were you the oldest? Were you the oldest?
No, I was the youngest. And you feel like somebody else is stirring up trouble. Why aren't they getting it?
Right?
Yes.
There's that desire for justice to be served.
Yes,
Right?
right.
When he got back, did he get to the line about how he was gonna work in the fields? I feel like he got cut off.
No.
Yeah,
It stops with the dinner. They have a big party for him to welcome him
Doesn't he
back.
say when he first sees his dad that doesn't he say what he came to say? Or no?
he says, "Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son." But the father then says, "Quickly, bring out the best robe.
We don't know. Maybe he's like, okay, there's no room left for you in this house. You're gonna go live in the shed, eating the animals. We had a big party for you, but tomorrow you go work in the hole. We don't know.
Interesting. So you think
There's
there's
gonna be retribution.
Yeah.
so there could be a celebration for him to return, but then he nevertheless will get the role of a hired hand,
Well, the
perhaps.
Maybe he has to atone.
Yeah.
Yeah, the father more or less says that. He says to the older son, he's given half of his
Yeah.
inheritance already
Right.
to the younger son, and he says, of course, what's left is yours to the older
Right.
son.
Everything that is left belongs to the older brother. It's not like the younger brother comes back and gets another half of what
Yes.
is
Right.
left over.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Maybe the older brother is gonna be his boss.
Yeah. I mean, the older brother is the one who's going to inherit and run the estate.
Right.
And so this is where the story gets complex for me, is that relationship between welcoming someone back and still holding them accountable for what they did.
Yes.
I mean, he messed up. He messed up royally. He told his father that his father was dead to him. That's essentially what he said by saying, "Give me my half of the inheritance." Like, he broke relationship with dad. Like, he told dad, "We're dead to each other," and that's not a thing to unsay.
Right.
And of course he's going to be welcomed back because parents love their kids. But I'm reminded of your kid messes up. It's the middle of the night. You get the call. You bring them home. You make sure they're safe. It's the next day. Is the hard conversation.
Yeah.
And I wonder about the next day conversation
Sure.
in this situation.
Yeah, so what is the next day conversation?
And I wonder, just going back to Eden, why did the dad say yes to splitting up his inheritance and giving him half?
Oh,
That
good
is
question.
always like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
wait a minute, that's not normal, it wasn't normal then.
Right.
Why would he agree to that right off the bat?
What-
In
what do you
some
imagine? Why
sense,
would
it
the-
feels
would the
to
dra-
me like
would the dad say
father
that?
is a little bit culpable here.
Okay.
Because he has a young son, we don't know the age, but who's rash, obviously.
Yeah.
And he sets him up with all this money. I mean, it's like
So he
rich kids
enables the
blowing a
son
bunch
to
of money
make
on
poor
cocaine.
decisions.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Like, if they didn't have that money, maybe they wouldn't do that.
Right. Yeah.
So that part has always bothered me. Like, what made the we're not told in the story,
Yeah.
but what made the father say yes to that request?
Yeah, so you're saying that perhaps the father should have been like, no, you're not ready yet.
Yeah,
Yeah. I'm not gonna.
Or he could have said, you're free to leave,
right.
but you can't take half our estate's
Yeah.
value right
Yeah.
yeah.
Who's-
Why wouldn't the
from
father?
0 to I'm leaving in a day? So there's probably a long conversation here that maybe we're missing.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay, so there perhaps a slower build than it sounds like in
Yeah.
the short telling of the story.
Who's the victim here?
What do you think?
Interesting question.
I mean, is it the father, is it the son, or is it the prodigal son? I
What,
mean,
yeah, what are you imagining?
I think Matt brings up a really interesting point, or maybe I'm sorry, the father, the father was kind of taken advantage of here.
Well, he didn't have to say yes.
He didn't have to say yes.
Yeah. But yeah, so the father said yes. For whatever reason.
For whatever reason.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, as a parent of boys, if this was a young man doing all kinds of mayhem, the father might have just wanted to be like, get this guy out of my house, live my life. And maybe thought giving him the money would kick him into adulthood somehow.
Sure, yeah, perhaps the hopes of,
But then
maybe this will
also,
bring some maturity.
being a daughter of a mom who's living to a ripe old age, and my brother, why are we doing different things with mom's investments? And it's like, because mom's still alive. And so that's the interesting thing too, is that the dad had every right to decide the things he was doing with his money and welcoming the son back because it was his to still do that.
Sure, yeah. So he could easily have said no, like I don't want to divide my inheritance yet, but also he had every right, to throw the party because the remaining half of the estate was still his and had not been handed to the older brother yet. Yeah. And so perhaps there's the older brother too. Just hearing this and what you're saying, the older brother too is perhaps acting like the estate already belongs to him in a way.
Could be, but also the older brother the older brother kept, to your point, the older brother kept the relationship with his father and being part of the family, where the younger son somehow felt like he had to separate from the family, and then hired himself back.
Yeah.
So he knew he should not be welcomed back
Right.
as part of the family.
Yeah, so that's that difference of breaking off relationship versus holding on to the relationship. At the beginning of today's stories, the Pharisees here and the experts of the law say that Jesus welcomes sinners and eats with them. If you've ever looked at our altar table, that you'll see these words inscribed on them. So I'll make note of that as something that is historically very important for our parish. I wonder what these words tell you about Jesus.
He's a compassionate person.
Yeah, I'm thinking the word empathy.
Okay, so compassion, empathy, Forgiveness?
In forgiveness, regardless of.
Yeah.
Forgiveness.
Social orders are held together by who we eat with and how we eat with them. And so he's very much breaking a social order by eating with a class of people he wasn't supposed to be eating with. Now, whether that was intentional, whether he knew I'm breaking a social order by doing this, or whether that was just him doing his thing, I don't know. But he was breaking it.
Yeah, so there's something disruptive about it.
Incredibly disruptive.
Yeah.
I'm just commenting because, of course, I'm very, very aware of the inscription on our altar table, and I never have associated that text with the prodigal son story. I never knew that they went together. It's like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing that I'm thinking about, because I just recently read Spare, Prince Harry's book about his life, and the whole heir and the spare thing, and how here we have the heir and the spare, kind of, and everything. I mean, it's somewhat different because of paparazzi influenced everybody's life in that family. And the part of what Harry had to get away from was that madness and that killed his mother and all of that. But still, I could see the heir and the spare dynamic playing out in William and Harry's case, and in here too. It's interesting to correlate those two together. It's just fascinating.
Sure. Yeah.
And that how now, Harry had to leave the family because of all the stuff going on, and he's now lives in Southern California and is completely estranged from his family. Apparently, he and his brother are totally at odds, just like these two are in this story.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow.
Interesting to imagine what would happen if Harry went back.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Does the version we read say that the younger son got his share or his half?
It says half, I think.
It says half. That seems a little odd to me, that a non-first son would get.
Was ancient Israel a primogeniture
That's what I thought.
culture? Okay.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So that strikes me itself as just a little bit odd there.
Yeah, the younger son said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the inheritance." And then the father divided his estate between them. That
That doesn't mean it necessarily.
It doesn't necessarily mean half.
right. To my knowledge, the custom of primogeniture, a fancy word, was that the eldest son would get a double portion. So maybe it was a third, and the other got 2/3. I'm not sure.
Okay.
That's interesting.
So one thing about this relationship between
Yeah, and I think I was saying half earlier, so apologies for that.
So one thing about this relationship between the elder son and the younger son that strikes me is, from my own experience and other, people that I know, in families where you have one child, no matter where they are in the birth order, that is becomes an addict or is really struggling in life and stealing from people, doing other things, they end up taking a lot of their parents' attention and time, and sometimes money, depending on the situation, trying to help this clearly troubled child. And the other kids often feel resentment that they're not just, that their parents' time and attention is money, and money is going towards a child that's not, that's clearly not doing well or doing stupid things, whether that's drug addiction or, there's many ways that this can come out. And I know this in my own family, but I also know it from close friends and dealing with that. And it's natural, obviously, for the parents to help the child that's struggling the most, but it also creates this resentment among the other children. And so there's a piece of that I never really thought of with this story until today.
The extra attention.
Yeah, that part of that, it's not fair, that anger feeling is, wait a minute,
Yeah.
why is this person getting all the attention?
Yeah. And sometimes the more visceral parts aren't even about the property, but about the parents' attention.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So speaking of, multiple siblings, there are many ancient Jewish stories about a father having two sons. There's Abraham, who had Ishmael and Isaac. There's Isaac, who had Esau and Jacob. there's Adam who had Cain and Abel. And then, of course, David was the youngest of many sons. And in all of these stories, it is the youngest son who, contrary to the norm of the time, repping a younger son
youngest son
okay.
over here.
Contrary to the norm
Only
of the
son.
time, the younger son receives the father's blessing and the greatest inheritance. So I wonder what Jesus is saying when he tells this story and plays with this familiar storyline.
Interesting.
Give everything to the youngest son.
Clearly, that's the lesson we should take as a younger son myself.
Blood is thicker than water. I mean, it's almost like, you know what, we're family, and we're going to be there for you through thick and thin. But I keep on thinking about what you're saying about the other family members being like, folding their arms and being pissed off.
Right.
You know? But I think Jesus is saying is that we're all there for each other, and we're all children of God, and therefore God is always going to be there and accepting of you, warts and all. I mean, that sounds so simple, but I kind of think that's it.
Yeah. Okay.
Can you read us again what the words that the father says to the older son? Because they seem very compassionate.
Son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found.
And to me, that's a really kind of beautiful speech, because it is acknowledging the older son and his feelings and saying, you're really valued, you're always with me. You know, I know that, I see that, I recognize that, you've always stuck with me. But when someone who has, that I thought was dead has come back, that's one of the worst things you can think of as a
validating
parent.
the
is
older
losing a
son's
child.
place and his role,
Yeah,
and yet saying this is important.
yeah.
So I wonder
And
now.
he says everything I have is yours.
Right.
He's
Yeah.
acknowledging the older son.
So, given all that we've discussed, I wonder where the good news is for you today.
Well, for me, it's about what gets said to the older son. It's, when we have those difficult feelings of jealousy or anger, to just try to get a broader perspective, understand about being truly loved by God, and that love extends to everyone, and moving you towards forgiveness. Yeah.
So the father's words to the older son.
Yeah, it reminds me of that parable of the laborers going out, and the one who worked the shortest time got paid the same as the guy who worked the longest time. And this one is kind of like that, accepting, embracing the older son when he had been loyal the whole time. And so the good news would be, no matter what, you're going to be accepted. How about that?
So no matter what, you're going to be accepted.
Yeah.
I had a really hard time finding the good news through the moral hazard in this particular.
You felt too
parable.
much moral hazard.
Yeah, I have a hard time with it. I really do. I mean, I'd like to go with the good news of, like we can always be welcome back, yada yada. But I still have a hard time with this one.
Okay. That's what
I had a similar response to Catherine in that, as a youngest son myself, knowing that I'm going to be welcome no matter what. Not that I've screwed up royally, and had to beg forgiveness, but just, and to be honest, what's kind of resonating for me is being gay, having had to come out to my parents. Thankfully, I was not kicked out of the house, anything like that. But the relationship with my father, it took several years for us to become for him to become, I was fine, but for him to be comfortable with me, it took a number of years. And the good news is that eventually, my parents discovered PFLAG in their church, started going, and then they ended up becoming the leaders of the PFLAG for years.
Wow.
For years, they went, and every month, and they went and they told the story about how I came out to them every time. And then for I don't know, like 15 years or more, they went and they supported the people that came in. Interestingly, so this is in Berkeley, California, and in their church was near the Cal campus, and so it was mostly young people coming to go to school at Cal. These are, the 18 to 22-year-olds at Cal who were struggling with coming out themselves. And they came to the meetings. It was less about the parents, PFLAG, parents and friends. It was the young gay people discovering who they were and being in a situation where they were accepted and loved was the big thing, and reflected from my parents saying, you're fine, you're good, here we are, we'll support you. And that's, seeing that experience turn around in my life from my own experience, and then to see them go on to become the loving people for everybody else resonates in this story.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for wondering along with me about today's story.